Let me shift things a little bit to the chancellor. You walked into a position that there's never been a female in charge of before in a school system that is historic by its nature and length of time. So as an administrator, what did you find that you needed to fix, you thought that had to fix, that had some gender bias? Because you haven't, I assume most of the collective bargaining agreements and pay equity here, at least now, is not an issue, or is it?
No, it's not right now.
That's the good news.
I guess the biggest problem, I'm going to speak more generally, I think, for higher education, is that reflective of what happens in society, there are some roles that are typically defined by gender in the past that get replicated.
Chancellor? Chancellor
that get replicated over and over, in part because of implicit bias. And so we know now that fundamental assumptions are made implicitly. Don't know you're even making those biased decisions. So the most important thing that we can do is to challenge the classifications at the outset. You know, are you creating opportunities for people to move in other directions than those traditional patterns? Do you have flexible work schedules? Do you have opportunities for people to imagine themselves in different roles? Are there leadership opportunities? I just attended one in New Brunswick last week that was all women, and we talked about what it meant to be chancellor and what it meant to be various roles that people were aspiring to. It's a 7-week session, a 7-month session that really was designed to kind of focus on the fact that there are those traditions that get replicated. The other thing that we've been doing, at least because we have a law school, is we have gender bias and race bias training that's made available for the entire community of faculty and administrators and others, because that's one way also that we can re-examine our own biases. So I'm proud of those kinds of things that happen. But I know the reality is when I go into a room, for example, in the last several weeks I've been going to different departments, I can see the race and I can see the gender replicated into those traditional roles even now, even with those kind of resources.
Not here at Rutgers, but in general, is there one area that stands out in your mind as the most obvious or that needed to be changed?
Yeah, I think it is those defined roles that are lower paying, that are service focused, that still clearly are the ones where women and people of color are found. So some of what we can do is reclassify those kinds of things.
When I grew up, they were called the lunch ladies. I have never heard the term lunch men.
No.
That's one.
No.
Mary Cruz, who's our chief of staff, we have some folks in the audience we want to hear from, and also Facebook is also, so Mary, who are we with?
Yeah, I think actually we have Elizabeth right here. Did you want to ask a question? No, okay. Does anyone else ask a question? I know there's one over here I'll get to. Just get over there.
No, while she's going around, I'll say, people have to imagine themselves in different roles as well. And I think that's one of the important things that we can do in a place like this, in a community where you have role models and opportunities to imagine that you can also be in those roles.
I think we have 3 role models up here.
That's exactly right.
The idea of having the conversation of having a baby while in the legislature, it puts a real face on people next to you having to make these decisions. That's so important. Mary?
Yep, we have Lisa here. So.
Good afternoon. As a retired teacher in the state of New Jersey, I'm concerned. I'm angered about the continued gaps in educational excellence not afforded to students of color, especially African American youth. What is being done to close the gap to ensure all students have access to a quality education regardless of their zip code, in communities that have had or continue to have a culture of white privilege blocking this access. And I know currently there's a lawsuit out of South Orange that is speaking to this now. So my concern is what's going on in not only up in North Jersey, our partners, but down here in South Jersey, which I know I've seen instances of this occur. So not a big test fan either, no part, no. It's not a true indicator of success. So with that being said, I'll allow you to answer.
Thank you for your question. So we have three different perspectives. Gabby, why don't you start from the state perspective? You're chair of the Women and Children Committee, but also participating very closely with the education and higher ed.
Yes, so I have to say, first of all, I was a bill sponsor to stop PARC. I didn't like PARC myself. I didn't think that it was a good indicator of a child's intelligence, and also it put a heavy burden on teachers, teaching to a test, and that's not the point of being educated or going to school. And then another thing that we have done in the legislature that it's very important is actually funding the school formula. That is one of the biggest things. That's what we have to do in the state of New Jersey, is actually fund this formula. Making sure that every child in this state, whether it's from Paterson, New Jersey, Camden City, or even in Glassboro, New Jersey, each child, every child gets equal access to an education. So that's what we're doing, and that's something that is a struggle. It was a struggle last year. It was a fight with the governor last year, and it's my hope that this year will be a different story.
I think it will be. First thing comes to mind is you have obviously your educational system that's directly involved with you. Let's go to higher ed. Bridging the gap is certainly one way of trying to balance it out, but in many ways it's after they get to you.
Right. So we have a relationship with K through 12 in a number of schools in North Camden. And that's the way that we've been able to work with that. We're committed to civic engagement. We have an award-winning program in civic engagement, and that civic engagement is concerned across the board, but particularly in the K through 12 space, as they say. And that also means that our students, as well as faculty, are involved in the work. The students are in the schools. Over 200 students are in schools doing this work. But it also means that in the summer, there are hundreds of students who are on this campus, actually having summer opportunities to bridge the gap between the summertime milk and the 10-year program of education. So we're committed to that.
So having mentors, and each of you talked about your mentors, but when it comes to education, there are mentors. They did it, I can do it. Do you see that happening now, that children who called Camden home are seeing so many more in the Rutgers system, in the Rowan system?
Yeah, so first I want to say that we have a tremendous number of students from Camden in the last couple of years through Bridging the Gap that are on our campus as freshmen. Typically, many people had come as transfer students in the past, but Bridging the Gap, which is a scholarship program that enables many students to have tuition-free opportunities. It's one that's being studied by the Federal Reserve Bank because what we found is that students had so many jobs, and they were jobs that weren't helping them to get along through their education process. They were across the street or down the street at Subway or somewhere else rather than working on campus. This program enables people to work on campus. They are then enabled through their work to see themselves in those roles we were talking about. So it's a good way of our serving the civic engagement focus, but also higher education.
Thank you. Tammy, your husband's talked about the community college being tuition-free and how important that is. You're now playing a role that, by many measurements, is much more active than previous first ladies, which there's so many people that applaud that perspective is being broadened. When your husband talked about that education, well, it didn't start when he put his hand on the Bible and sworn in. You've lived with him for a few years. You've been part of that. Can you share with us some of the broader views that you have and that you share with him when it comes to the issues and the question we were just asked?
Sure. First of all, Phil and I have been partners in everything since the beginning. So it's very natural for us to work together. And I am here, I'm very fortunate that I have the ability to show up each day and really give it my best. I will do whatever it takes to help Phil and Sheila be successful because I believe entirely in what they're trying to do for our state and for all 9 million people in our state, which goes directly to that question. First of all, he does not support, nor do I, the PARCC testing. You should know that if you don't know that already. He does believe that we should fund the school funding formula. I mean, it's the only formula that's been approved by our Supreme Court, so you would think that one would follow through on that. So we are desperately desperately working toward funding the school funding formula. As far as community colleges go, he would love to make community colleges free. And one of the reasons he would like to make them free is that, it enables people at all walks of life. Doesn't matter if you're re-entering the workforce, if you're changing your job, if you're new to the workforce, community colleges could be a real generator for economic growth in our state. And it's really not that expensive to fully fund community college. Is like $200 million, which is a lot of money, but I recognize that, but it's not in the bigger scheme of things, it's not that much money.
Compared to $800 billion for defense in 1 year alone.
Yeah. But it goes farther than even just K to 18. I mean, who woke up and said that before the age of 5, you should wholly be ignored and we shouldn't help support your education? There's so much to do in terms of educating our state. And Phil and I both feel very strongly that education is the great equalizer. It is the one way that we can all contribute. We can feel like we are active in our society. And we have so many plans on the education. I mean, you should know as well that I currently serve on 3 education boards, so I have a lot of thoughts on this, but I don't want to take up too much oxygen in this room, so I will just leave it at that, and I'm happy to talk to you about some of these things later.
I think we just got a high five from Isabel. Education, and there's so many studies that show that the preschool, or what is commonly referred to as preschool, minimum wage has been an issue that our governor has talked about. And I would ask everybody in this room, does anybody think you can make it on $7.25 an hour, the national wage, or even the minimum wage we have? Yeah, which is increasingly happening more and more across there. 65% of those earning minimum wage are women, and remarkably, the majority of those women head of household are the highest percentage making minimum wage. So those with the most responsibility, not only for themselves, but for their families and the next generation, are those who have historically and even today are being paid less. So the state has talked about minimum wage. You passed it several times under the last governor. Gabby, what do you see happening for the minimum wage? And do you see it as the $15 an hour? What are those conversations that are being had now?
We are hoping that are very positive. I know that there are a lot of people in leadership that are very supportive of this, making it the fight for 15. I keep hearing that a lot, and I think that it's something that we should do. I know that in the state of New Jersey, more than 400,000 families here women are considered head of household, and about 23% of them live under the poverty line, and that's horrible. So I think that increasing the minimum wage to $15 an hour will benefit 52% of New Jersey women. 52% of New Jersey women will be benefiting, or increase of the minimum wage. So I'm very hopeful that, I know that conversations are happening, and I'm hoping that, this is something that we can achieve in the next couple of years.
Just if you're not aware, it has been over a decade since we had that vote in Washington to raise the minimum wage. Hard to believe that $1.5 trillion just given back to those in less than 1% of the income bracket, and we have not increased the minimum wage. Phoebe, Rutgers has been forefront here. Why don't you share what you're doing with regards to minimum wage?
I'm going to talk about it a little differently. This is affecting the students because we have had work study as a way of supporting people, and lots of people know about work study in terms of those opportunities. But that level is even less than the $15 or so that people are talking about. And so we had discovered over the last several years that many students were going hungry. This is an issue that has gotten some national attention, but when I started asking about the reality here, we realized that many students may miss 1 or sometimes 2 meals a day because they simply didn't have that other support other than the tuition to enable them to eat. And so we have a food pantry, and it's fully stocked now, but it is also something that really is a sad commentary on the fact that people are not just impoverished, but are going hungry in the United States. And you can't study, you can't perform, you can't be vibrant in classroom if you're hungry. It's something that really struck my heart.
Certainly. So one of the impediments for the last 8 years happened to be the person who was at the front office. We've had a little change. Where do you see the idea of not only minimum wage, but wages primarily for those who need it the most, who have been hampered? If you're on minimum wage or barely above it, daycare. You're not looking at the best quality daycare. You're trying to balance what you can afford, which just adds in so many more layers of difficulty and challenges for those who are, as Gabby said, you make it work. What do you see happening on the state level from the front office?
Well, I think it's pretty noteworthy that the very first day when Phil was inaugurated, the very first executive order was to make it do a study and make sure that it's one cannot ask a woman how much you're being paid. You shouldn't go in. So I'll give you an example. If 2 people show up for a job and the employer says, you know what, I think I have to pay this person $40,000. And a woman walks in and she said, and the employer says, how much do you make? And you say, $30,000. The employer says, I can pay her $35,000, save myself $5,000, and everybody's going to be happy. And that's exactly how women have gotten into the ditch we're in.